I stood in the rain, watching my nursing degree curl from the dampness while my brother toasted his victory inside our childhood home. He told me to leave and change the locks before the funeral flowers wilted. I thought the will reading would finish me, until the lawyer placed a sealed drive on the table. My mother had prepared for this day for years, starting with the reading of a fraud investigation warrant that made my brother go pale. My name is Elena James. I am 35 years old, and for my entire life, I have been invisible in the Rowe family. Visibility was a privilege reserved solely for the male heir. I was the shadow that moved through the hallways, the hands that scrubbed the dishes, the quiet voice that answered the phone. My brother, Tyler, was the son. My father, Frank Rowe, orbited him with a desperate, blind devotion, convinced that his legacy could only be carried by someone who shared his last name and his gender. I was just the daughter, the backup plan, the nurse who knew how to clean up the messes everyone else left behind. But nothing prepares you for the moment your invisibility becomes an eviction notice. It had been exactly 2 days since the funeral. The earth over my parents' graves in the Grand Richmond Cemetery hadn't even settled yet. The flowers were likely brown and withered, mirroring the sudden decay of what I used to call my family. I remembered the conversation from that morning with absolute clarity. Tyler had pulled me out onto the porch, his hand gripping my arm with a force that bordered on aggressive. He looked at me with eyes that were dry, devoid of the red-rimmed grief that made my own face puffy and raw. He had said it simply, as if stating the weather. This house is mine. Elena, Dad built it. I am the son. It is how things are done. I thought he was grieving. I thought it was the stress talking, the panic of losing both parents in a single, horrific highway accident. I told myself he needed space, so I went to work. I put on my scrubs, drove to Pinecrest Care Center, and spent 12 hours washing patients, administering medication, and holding the hands of strangers who were dying alone. I gave everything I had to the world, believing that when I returned home, I would at least have a bed to collapse into. I was wrong. The rain was coming down in sheets when I pulled into the driveway. It was a cold, miserable Virginia downpour that soaked through your clothes in seconds. I ran up the front steps, shielding my face, and jammed my key into the front door lock. It stopped halfway. I frowned, wiping water from my eyes, and tried again. I jiggled it. I pulled it back and shoved it forward. Nothing. The metal teeth grated against a barrier that shouldn't have been there. I stepped back and looked at the hardware. The brass was shiny, pristine. It wasn't the tarnished, scratched knob I had turned 1,000 times since high school. It was brand new. He had changed the locks. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I ran to the side door, the one near the garage, locked. The deadbolt there was new too. I could see the fresh wood shavings on the frame, where the installation had been rushed. Then I turned around, in the darkness, amidst the pouring rain. I saw the pile, It was heaped in the middle of the front lawn, like a mound of refuse waiting for the garbage truck. It was a chaotic, soaking wet mountain of fabric and paper. I walked toward it, my boots sinking into the mud. It was my life. There were my clothes, pulled from the closet and thrown in heaps. My sweaters were heavy with water. My books, my hard-earned medical textbooks that had cost me thousands of dollars, were splayed open, their pages swollen and tearing in the wind, and there, near the bottom, was a cardboard box that had collapsed from the moisture. I saw my nursing degree, the paper curling into a gray, unrecognizable tube. The ink was running, bleeding off the page like black tears. I stood frozen, the rain matting my hair against my skull. I felt stripped, violated. This wasn't just an eviction. It was an erasure. A movement in the window caught my eye. I looked up at the living room, the warm yellow light spilling out onto the wet lawn. Savannah was there, my sister-in-law. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine. She looked comfortable. She looked like she belonged. She saw me standing there in the mud, shivering, surrounded by the wreckage of my belongings. And she didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile, terrified and triumphant all at once. She raised her glass slightly, a mock toast to the woman drowning in the yard, and then turned away, disappearing back into the warmth that was no longer mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling hands. The screen was wet, but I saw the name, Tyler. I answered, but I couldn't find my voice. 24 hours, his voice said. It was cold, metallic, stripped of any history we shared. You have 24 hours to get that junk off my lawn. Elena, if it is not gone by tomorrow night, I am calling a hauler to take it to the dump. Do not test me. The line went dead. I didn't scream. I wanted to. I wanted to pick up a rock and hurl it through the window. I wanted to kick down the door and demand to know how he could do this to his own blood. But I didn't. I stood there, silent. The shock was a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs, making it hard to breathe. The grief of losing Mom and Dad was suddenly compounded by the grief of losing the brother I thought I had. He wasn't my brother anymore. He was just a man who had stolen my home. I knelt in the mud, frantic now, trying to salvage what I could. I grabbed the plastic bins first, the ones that had survived the rain. I saw the box labeled gardening supplies. It was an old, beaten-up plastic tote that Mom used to keep by the back shed. Why was this out here? It had been in the garage. Tyler must have cleared out everything he didn't recognize or value. I remembered Mom's vase from a month ago. Weak but insistent. Elena, if anything happens, check the garden box, the one with the heirloom seeds. I popped the lid off. Inside, it was dry. There were packets of tomato seeds, rusty trowels, and a pair of old gloves stiff with dried earth. I dug through them, my heart hammering against my ribs. At the bottom, taped to the underside of a false cardboard bottom I hadn't noticed before, was a Ziploc bag. I ripped the tape loose. Inside the bag was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't standard stationery. It was heavy, expensive paper, the kind Mom only used for thank-you notes to the church elders. I held it up to the faint streetlight. On the front, in handwriting that was unmistakably hers, spidery, elegant, but shaky from the tremors she had hidden from everyone but me, were 5 words. For Elena. When it is time. I stared at the envelope. The rain hammered against the plastic bag, but the paper inside remained dry. Secure, waiting, I didn't open it. Not there, not while Savannah could still be watching from the window. And certainly not while Tyler was likely pacing behind the front door, waiting for me to break down. I shoved the bag deep inside my waterproof coat, pressing it against my chest. A sudden, chilling clarity cut through the fog of my shock. Mom hadn't just died, leaving me helpless. She hadn't been the passive, silent wife Tyler thought she was. She had written this. She had hidden it. She had placed it in the one box she knew Tyler would dismiss as trash, but I would recognize as treasure. She knew. She had known this day would come. She had known that the moment she was gone, the wolves would turn on me. I looked back at the house one last time. It loomed dark and imposing against the storm, a fortress I was locked out of. But as I gripped the envelope beneath my coat, I realized something important. Tyler thought he had won because he held the keys to the door, but he didn't know I was holding the key to something else entirely. I turned my back on the house, walked to my car, and started the engine. I had 24 hours to move my life, but I had the rest of my life to find out what was in this envelope. And for the first time that night, the cold didn't feel quite so biting. To understand why my brother threw my clothes into the mud without a second thought, you have to understand the architecture of the Rowe family. It was not built on bricks and mortar. It was built on a very specific, unspoken theology, where the sun rose and set on the male heir, and the daughter was simply the shadow cast by his brilliance. Growing up, the garage was the sanctuary. It was a space of oil, sawdust, and serious talk, a place where my father, Frank Rowe, held court. Every Saturday morning, the garage door would roll up, and the lessons would begin. I would watch from the kitchen window as Dad leaned over the workbench, showing Tyler how to read a blueprint, or how to negotiate a contractor down on lumber prices. Tyler was not just a son. He was a project. He was the vessel into which Frank Rowe poured every ounce of his ambition, every connection he had made in the construction business, and every dollar he had saved. I was not invited into the garage. My domain was the linoleum floor of the kitchen and the dust bunnies under the living room sofa. While Tyler learned how to build an empire, I learned how to clean up after one. If I walked into the garage to ask a question, the conversation would stop. Dad would look at me with a mild annoyance, wipe his grease-stained hands on a rag, and tell me to go help my mother. Girls do not need to know how to frame a wall, he would say. Girls need to know how to make a home comfortable for the men who build the walls. It was not malicious. That was the worst part. It was just a fact of nature to him. Like gravity. When Tyler turned 18, the world opened up for him like a red carpet. Dad pulled strings to get him into a prestigious business program. He paid for the tuition, the apartment, the car, and the fraternity dues. It was an investment. Tyler was the stock that was guaranteed to skyrocket. When I graduated high school 2 years later and placed my acceptance letter to nursing school on the dinner table, the reaction was different. Dad chewed his steak, looked at the paper, and shrugged. He asked me why I wanted to waste 4 years studying to wipe sick people when I could just find a nice husband and settle down. He told me he had already spent the education budget on Tyler. If I wanted to be a nurse, I would have to figure it out myself. So I did. I spent my 20s in a state of perpetual exhaustion. I worked double shifts at a diner, then later as a certified nursing assistant, scraping together tuition dollar by dollar. I studied on buses, in break rooms, and by the light of the stove hood at 3 a.m. When I graduated with honors, there was no celebratory dinner. There was no new car. There was just a nod from my father and a comment that at least I would always have a job to fall back on if my marriage failed. My mother, Elaine, lived in the space between us. She never contradicted Frank publicly. To the outside world, she was the perfect, compliant wife. But in the quiet corners of the house, she watched me. She saw the dark circles under my eyes. She saw me come home from a 12-hour shift, smelling of disinfectant and fatigue, and she would silently slide a plate of hot food in front of me. I remember one evening in particular. It was late, and the house was asleep. I was sitting at the kitchen island, crying over a biochemistry textbook because I was short on rent for the month. Mom came in. She did not turn on the lights. She just stood next to me, stroking my hair with her rough, warm hand. She leaned down and whispered something that I did not fully understand at the time. She said that one day I would see. She said she had been preparing. I thought she meant she was saving a little cash in a cookie jar. I had no idea she was playing a game of 3-dimensional chess against her own husband's worldview. As the years went by, the monster my father created in the garage began to walk on its own. Tyler did not just accept the help. He inhaled it. He grew up believing that the world owed him its best cuts of meat. He became a man who thought success was a birthright, not a result of labor. When he started his own contracting firm, funded entirely by Dad, he acted as if he had built it from the ground up with his bare hands. Then came Savannah. She appeared right after Tyler landed his first big government contract. She was beautiful, polished, and terrifyingly ambitious. She looked at our family home not as a place of memories, but as a piece of real estate. When she spoke to me, her tone shifted. It was the voice one uses for a waitress who has been slow with the water refill. She would ask me about my job at the care center, with a polite, thinly veiled disgust, as if touching sick people was a contagious disease. The The dynamic solidified into stone. Tyler and Savannah were the royalty. I was the help. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 6 months before the accident. It was Thanksgiving. I was in the hallway, carrying a stack of plates to the dining room. The door to the study was cracked open, and I heard Tyler's voice. He was not shouting, but his tone was urgent. He was on the phone, likely with Savannah, who was in the other room. He said that the legacy was definitely his. He said there was no need to worry about the sister. He said I was only sticking around because it was convenient for me to take care of Mom, and that I had no claim to the big assets. But then he said something else. He said they just needed to hold on a little longer. He said once the property was theirs, they could leverage it to stop the bleeding. I stood frozen in the hallway, the china rattling slightly in my hands. Stop the bleeding. It was not just an insult. It was a diagnostic. Wealthy. Successful men do not talk about stopping bleeding. They talk about expansion. They talk about growth. Tyler was desperate. Beneath the expensive suits and the new trucks, beneath Savannah's designer handbags and their country club membership, there was a crack in the foundation. They were not just waiting for my parents to die so they could inherit a fortune. They were waiting for my parents to die so they could cover a debt. I walked into the dining room and set the table, my face a mask of calm. I looked at Tyler across the roast turkey, watching him laugh and pour wine for Dad, playing the part of the golden son perfectly. He had no idea I had heard him. He had no idea that the sister he dismissed as a glorified maid was the only one paying attention to the cracks in the walls. That night, as I washed the dishes while they sat in the living room discussing vacation plans, I realized the truth. They did not hate me. Hate implies passion. They simply viewed me as an obstacle. I was a speed bump on their road to liquidity. And now, standing in the rain, years later with that envelope in my coat, I finally understood why the locks had been changed so quickly. It was not just cruelty. It was panic. Tyler needed to turn this house into cash, and he needed to do it before anyone asked too many questions. But he had forgotten the one rule that Dad never taught him in the garage. You never underestimate the person who holds the keys to the secrets, especially when that person has been invisible long enough to see everything. The decline of the Rowe family did not begin with the car accident on Interstate 64. It began 2 years earlier. Inside the walls of the house I have just been locked out of. That was when Mom got sick. It was a slow, stealing kind of illness, the type that eats away at a person's energy until their personality dies just a flicker behind tired eyes. I moved back home without being asked. I went to my supervisor at Pinecrest and requested a shift change, swapping my days for nights and weekends so I could be at the house during the week. I became a ghost in 2 places, haunting the hospital corridors by night and my childhood home by day. The contrast between my brother and me during those 24 months was so sharp it could cut glass. Tyler visited. That is the only verb that fits. He did not care for her. He visited her. He would swing by maybe once every 2 weeks, his truck idling in the driveway as if he needed a quick getaway vehicle. He would burst through the door, bringing a gust of outside air and frantic energy into the quiet. Sterile atmosphere I had carefully maintained. He would stand at the foot of her bed, wearing his expensive work boots, checking his smartwatch every 30 seconds. He looked at her, but I do not think he saw her. He saw a box he had to check. "Hey, Mom?" "Looking better," he would say, his voice too loud for the small room. Then, before she could even muster the breath to answer, his phone would ring. He would take it. He always took it. He would turn his back to her, pacing the room, talking about lumber prices, permit delays, or a client who was refusing to pay for a change order. I remember one afternoon clearly. Mom was trying to tell him about a bird she had seen at the feeder, a cardinal that reminded her of her own father. Tyler nodded, his eyes glazed over, and then cut her off to complain about a subcontractor who had poured a foundation wrong. "I have to run, Mom," he said, patting her shin through the blanket like she was a piece of furniture. "Big meeting. You look great. Though, keep fighting." Then he was gone, leaving the room vibrating with his stress. He never asked if she needed water. He never asked if she was in pain. He never asked me how the treatments were going. He just came to make sure she was still there, a fixture in his life that he expected to remain static until he was ready to deal with it. Savannah was worse. She came exactly one time in 2 years. She walked in wearing white linen pants, looking around the living room with a predatory sort of nostalgia. She did not sit on the edge of the bed. She stood near the doorway, as if afraid that illness was something she could catch if she got too close to the sheets. She took her phone out and started snapping photos. She took a picture of the fireplace, the crown molding, and the view from the bay window. "Just want to capture the memories," she told me, flashing a bright, empty smile. "It is such a beautiful house. It would be a shame to forget how it looks." She was not capturing memories. She was cataloging inventory. I stood there, holding a basin of warm water to wash my mother's face. And I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just dipped the washcloth into the water and turned my back on Savannah and her camera. The reality of those 2 years was not in the photos Savannah took or the business deals Tyler discussed. It was in the silence between the treatments. My mother, the woman who had once managed a household and navigated my father's temper with grace, became as helpless as a child. There were days when she could not lift a glass of water to her lips. I would sit on the edge of the bed, sliding my arm behind her neck to support her head, tilting the straw to her mouth. I learned the rhythm of her breathing. I learned to read the grimace that meant her pain medication was wearing off before she even asked for it. I changed the sheets when her body betrayed her. I bathed her, navigating the sharp angles of her collarbones and the fragility of her skin. I became her hands, her legs, and her dignity, and in that quiet intimacy, something shifted. The walls she had built up to survive Frank Rowe began to lower. We talked, not about big things, but about small, real things. She told me about her childhood in Williamsburg. She told me about books she had read and dreams she had let die in the laundry room. But there was a secret rhythm to those 2 years, one I did not understand until now. Once a month, on a Tuesday morning, Mom would insist on going out. It was a Herculean effort for her. I would have to help her dress, get her into the wheelchair, and maneuver her into the passenger seat of my sedan. She would be exhausted before we even backed out of the driveway, but her determination was made of steel. Just drive. Elena, she would say. She would guide me to a nondescript office building in the business district, or sometimes to a notary public in a strip mall 3 towns over. When we arrived, the instruction was always the same. Wait in the car. Honey, this will not take long. I hated it. I hated leaving her alone, watching her slow, painful shuffle toward the door. I offered to help. I offered to go in with her, but she refused with a sharpness that surprised me. No, she would say, "I need you to stay here. Please." So I sat in the car, listening to the radio, watching the minutes tick by. I assumed she was handling insurance paperwork. I assumed she was sorting out medical bills so Dad would not have to deal with them. I figured she was doing what she always did, cleaning up the mess so the men in her life could remain unbothered. When she came back out, she always looked different. Physically, she was drained, her face pale and her hands trembling, but her eyes were clear. There was a lightness to her, a strange sense of relief, as if she had just set down a heavy stone she had been carrying for miles. "It is done," she would whisper, closing her eyes as I buckled her seatbelt. "Let us go home." I never pushed. I thought she was just finalizing her will, making sure Tyler got the house and I got her jewelry, following the script my father had written for us decades ago. I dared not hope for anything else. Hope felt dangerous in a house like ours. Then came the night of the watch. It was 3 weeks before the accident. The house was silent, settled into the deep quiet of 2 a.m. I was sitting in the armchair next to her bed, reading under the dim light of a lamp. Mom woke up, her breathing shallow. She reached out and touched my wrist. "Elena," she rasped. I leaned in. "Do you need water? Do you need the morphine?" She shook her head. Her grip on my wrist tightened, surprisingly strong. With her other hand, she fumbled with the clasp of the watch she was wearing. It was an old thing, a simple leather band with a scratched face that she wore even when she slept. It was not valuable. Dad had bought her a diamond watch for their 30th anniversary. But she kept this one on. She unclasped it and pressed it into my palm. "Keep this," she whispered. I looked at it, confused. "Mom, you love this watch. Just wear it." "No," she said, her voice urgent. "Take it. Hide it. Do not put it in your jewelry box. Put it somewhere safe. Somewhere nobody looks." I frowned. "Why?" "Because," she said, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "When I am gone, Tyler will look. He will look everywhere. He will turn this house upside down." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mom, Tyler is not going to rob you." She smiled then, a sad, knowing smile that broke my heart. He will not think it is robbery. Elena, he will think he is just taking what is his. But he cannot have this. She closed my fingers over the cold metal and leather. Promise me, she said. I promise, I whispered. I slipped the watch into my pocket, thinking it was just sentimentality. The paranoia of a dying woman afraid of losing her history. I did not know then that I was holding a map. I did not know that while I was changing her sheets and feeding her soup, she had been fighting a war right under Tyler's nose, and she had been winning. I put the watch in the bottom of my gardening box the next day, burying it under a bag of potting soil, simply because she asked. I thought nothing of it until tonight, standing in the rain, realizing that the gardening box was the only thing I had left. The rain had followed me from the cemetery, a relentless, drumming companion that seemed determined to wash away whatever resolve I had left. But inside Janice Porter's apartment, the air was dry and smelled of cinnamon tea. Janice sat in the armchair across from me, her face lined with the kind of fatigue that comes from 30 years of nursing. But her eyes were alert. She didn't ask questions. She just poured the tea and waited. I sat on her sofa, wrapped in a knitted blanket that scratched against my chin. The envelope from the garden box lay on my lap. It felt heavy. Heavier than paper had any right to be. My parents were gone. It had started on a Tuesday, the most ordinary of days. They were driving to Williamsburg to visit my grandmother, Ruth. I remember the weather that morning, clear, crisp, the kind of day that promises nothing but routine. My mother had called me from the car just to say they had stopped for coffee. She sounded light, happy. 3 hours later, I was standing at the nurse's station at Pinecrest, updating a patient's medication chart. The phone rang. I picked it up without looking, expecting a doctor or a lab result. The voice on the other end was professional, detached, and utterly destructive. State Trooper Davis. Is this Elena James? The words Interstate 64 and head-on collision floated through the air like toxic spores. I didn't hear the rest. I remember dropping the receiver. It clattered against the desk, dangling by its cord, swinging back and forth. I walked away from it. I walked until I reached the stairwell, and then my legs simply stopped working. I sat down on the cold concrete steps, pulled my knees to my chest, and the world went silent. I could see the mouths of the people passing by moving, nurses shouting, visitors chatting, but I couldn't hear them. I was underwater. The days that followed were a gray blur, orchestrated entirely by Tyler. He handled the arrangements with the efficiency of a project manager dealing with a supply chain issue. He chose the caskets. He chose the hymns. He wrote the obituary. I was a ghost in my own tragedy, nodding when spoken to, signing where pointed. The funeral was yesterday. The church was packed. Dad's business associates filled the pews. Men in dark suits who checked their watches and whispered about contracts. Tyler stood at the podium for 20 minutes. He spoke of Frank Rowe, the builder, the visionary, the pillar of the community. He painted a portrait of a giant. And Mom? She got 2 sentences. And beside him stood Elaine, his faithful wife. She supported him in all things. That was it. 35 years of sacrifice, of silence, of holding the family together, while Frank Rowe built his empire, reduced to a footnote. I sat in the front row, staring at the back of Tyler's head, feeling a scream building in my throat that I didn't have the courage to release. I felt like a prop, a side character in the Tyler Rowe show. The reception was in the church hall. The room was stifling, smelling of lilies and damp wool. I was standing near the coffee urn, trying to steady my hands, when Tyler gripped my elbow. "We need to talk," he said. He pulled me into a corner, away from the mourners. He didn't look sad. He looked impatient. "I am going to need you to be out of the house by next week," he said. His voice was low, flat. I blinked at him. "What?" "The house. Elena. I am moving in. Savannah wants to start renovations immediately. The kitchen is outdated." I stared at him, unable to process the cruelty. "Tyler, we just buried them. That is my home. I have lived there for 2 years, taking care of Mom. We have not even read the will." Tyler let out a short, dismissive laugh. "The will? Elena, do not be naive. The will is a formality. Dad built the house. I am the son. That is how it works. You have a job. You can find an apartment. You have 1 week. I looked past him. Savannah was leaning against the far wall, scrolling through her phone. She looked bored. She tapped a long manicured fingernail against the screen, completely unbothered by the fact that her husband was evicting his sister 10 feet away. She was just waiting for the scene to end so she could get back to her real life. Tyler didn't even wait the week. 2 days later, today, he changed the locks. The memory of the rain soaking my nursing degree made me shiver again on Janice's sofa. Janice noticed. She pushed the teacup closer to me. "Drink," she said gently. "Then open it." She pointed to the envelope. I took a breath. The Ziploc bag had done its job. The cream-colored paper was dry. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, covered in my mother's handwriting. It was shaky, the loops of the letters uneven, written perhaps on one of those bad days when she couldn't hold a spoon. I read, "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. And if you are reading this, it means Tyler has done exactly what I feared he would do. He has put you out. He has claimed everything." My heart stopped. She knew. She had predicted every beat of this nightmare. He thinks he is the king, because your father told him he was. but kings fall. Elena, especially when they build their castles on sand. Do not cry for the house. It is just wood and stone. I need you to focus. You have spent your life thinking you were weak because you were kind. You are not weak. You are the only one of us who is truly strong. Do not sign anything Tyler gives you, no matter what he offers, no matter how he threatens. Do not sign. Go to Dana Kerr at the firm, Kerr and Halbrook. She has the rest. I have been preparing this for a long time. I was not just sitting in the car. Elena, I was ensuring that when I left, you would not be left behind. P.S. The watch. Look at the back. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This wasn't a letter of comfort. It was a set of instructions. It was a battle plan. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old watch she had pressed into my hand that night. I turned it over. I had never looked closely at the steel casing on the back. I squinted. There, scratched faintly into the metal, were 4 numbers. 1, 9, 8, 4. I looked up at Janice. My hands were trembling, but not from cold anymore. She knew. I whispered, Janice. She knew everything. Janice leaned forward. What does it say? It says I am not a victim, I said, my voice hardening. It says I have a lawyer. I looked back at the letter. I was not just sitting in the car. The image of my mother, frail, quiet, compliant Elaine Rowe, suddenly shifted in my mind. I had thought I was protecting her. I had thought I was the one shielding her from the world. But I was wrong. All those times she sighted me to wait in the car, all those insurance meetings she hadn't been tidying up affairs, she had been sharpening a knife, and she had just placed the handle in my hand. I folded the letter. The grief was still there, a massive, gaping wound in my chest. But for the first time, there was something else filling the space, a cold, burning curiosity. Tyler thought he had won. He thought he had kicked his little sister into the gutter. He had no idea he had just started the war. I sat in the yellow light of Janice's kitchen lamp, the rest of the apartment breathing in the slow rhythm of sleep, and I read the letter again. And then again. My mother's handwriting was usually so disciplined, a testament to the finishing school posture she had been forced to adopt in her youth. But here, the ink bled slightly into the grain of the paper, and the loops of her Y's and G's were jagged. I traced the words with my thumb, feeling the indentation of the pen. It was a physical connection to a hand that was now cold, a voice that had been silenced. Elena. The letter continued past the point where I had stopped earlier. I know what they made you feel. I know your father looked at you and saw only what you were not. He saw that you were not a son. He saw that you were not a builder, but he was blind. I felt a lump rise in my throat, hard and hot. You were never a burden. My love, You were the only thing in that house that was real. You were the best thing I ever did. Tyler is his father's son, built of ego and hunger. But you are mine, and because you are mine, I could not leave you defenseless. I put the paper down on the table, my hands shaking so hard the coffee in my mug rippled. All those years. I had thought she was just as trapped as I was. I thought she was a passive observer of my marginalization. When Dad ignored my grades to praise Tyler's mediocre football stats, she had stayed silent. When Tyler mocked my nursing scrubs, she had looked away. I had forgiven her for it because I thought she was weak. I was wrong. She hadn't been weak. She had been waiting. Go to Kerr and Halbrook. The letter commanded, the tone shifting from maternal warmth to steel-spined instruction. Ask for Dana Kerr. She holds the rest of the truth. And listen to me. Elena, this is the most important thing I will ever tell you. Do not sign anything Tyler gives you. He will try to make you feel small. He will try to make you feel greedy. He will tell you that it is standard procedure. It is a lie. If you sign, you close the door, have spent 5 years opening. I slept fitfully on Janice's couch, clutching the letter like a shield. When I woke up, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the sky a bruised, heavy purple. I dressed in the only clean clothes I had salvaged, a pair of black slacks and a gray sweater, and drove toward the city center. Kerr and Halbrook was not the kind of law firm you found on a billboard next to the highway. It was housed in a brick building that dated back to the Civil War, with ivy strangling the facade and a brass plaque that looked like it was polished hourly. I walked into the lobby at 9 a.m. The receptionist looked up, her expression practiced and impassive. "I am here to see Dana Kerr," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Elena James. I expected to be asked for an appointment. I expected to be told to wait. Instead, the receptionist's eyes widened slightly. She picked up the phone immediately. "Ms. James is here," she said into the receiver. Less than a minute later, a woman walked out from the double oak doors. Dana Kerr was not what I expected. She was perhaps 50, with silver hair cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob and glasses that framed eyes that missed nothing. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. She didn't smile, but her expression wasn't unkind. It was focused, intense. "Elena," she said, extending a hand. "I was wondering when Tyler would finally push you far enough to bring you here. The wind went out of me. You were expecting me? Elaine told me to expect you the moment the funeral was over. Dana said, 'Come with me.' Her office smelled of old paper and leather. It was a fortress of books, wall-to-wall legal texts that dampened the sound of the city outside. Dana gestured for me to sit in a wingback chair and took her place behind a massive mahogany desk. She didn't open a file. She didn't need to. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at me. "Your mother was a remarkable woman." "Elena," she said softly. I looked down at my hands. I did not know she was doing any of this. She always told me to wait in the car. That was for your safety. Dana replied, and for hers. If Tyler or Frank had known what she was doing, they would have stopped her. They would have frozen accounts, moved assets, or bullied her into submission. Your mother played the long game. She played the part of the oblivious housewife perfectly, because it was the only armor she had. She prepared for years? I asked, the confusion still swirling. But why? If she had assets, why didn't she just leave them to me in a normal will? Dana leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Because a normal will can be contested. A normal will is just a piece of paper that men like your brother can tear apart in court, with enough money and enough lawyers. Your mother knew that Tyler would feel entitled to everything. She knew he would view any inheritance you received as a theft from his birthright, so she didn't just leave you money. Elena. I frowned. Then what did she leave me? Dana paused, letting the silence stretch in the room. Your mother hid power. She said she constructed a legal labyrinth that Tyler cannot smash through with a hammer. She built a trap. But for the trap to work, you have to be the bait. I felt a chill run through me. The bait? The reading of the will is scheduled for next Friday. Donna said, between now and then, Tyler is going to realize that he does not have access to everything he thought he did. He is going to hit roadblocks, bank accounts he cannot touch, deeds he cannot find. He is going to get desperate. And when he gets desperate, he is coming for you. He already kicked me out, I said bitterly. That was just a tantrum, Dana corrected. The real move is coming. He will try to get you to sign a waiver. He will probably offer you a lump sum of cash, something that sounds generous to a nurse but is peanuts compared to the estate's value, in exchange for you waiving your right to contest the will or claim any further assets. He will try to buy you out before the cards are even on the table. The warning in Mom's letter rang in my ears. Do not sign anything. That is his shortcut. Dana continued. If you sign that waiver, the trap disarms. He gets everything, and you get whatever crumbs he throws at you. Your mother's entire strategy relies on you holding the line until we are in that conference room. Can you do that? I thought of Tyler's face in the rain. I thought of Savannah's smirk as she watched me from the window. I thought of my mother, frail and dying, pressing the watch into my hand because it was the only weapon she could smuggle to me. I am not signing anything. I said, Good. Dana said. She opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh file folder. It was thick. Go somewhere safe. Stay with your friend. Do not answer Tyler's calls, unless you have to. And when you do, be vague. Let him think you are scared. Let him think you are defeated. It will make him careless. I stood up to leave, my legs feeling steadier than they had in days. I reached for the door handle, but then I stopped and turned back. Dana? Yes? Was she scared? At the end? At the end? Dana took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at me with a softness that she hadn't shown before. She was terrified. Elena, not of dying. She was terrified that she had run out of time to protect you. She spent her last breaths ensuring you would have a voice when she could no longer speak. Do not waste it. I walked out of the law firm and into the daylight. The city looked the same. Cars honking, people rushing to work, the mundane rhythm of life churning on. But I felt different. For 35 years, I had been a passenger in my own life, driven by the whims of my father and brother. I had been the girl who waited in the car. I gripped my car keys, the metal biting into my palm. Not anymore. I wasn't just a nurse. I wasn't just a sister. I was the keeper of Elaine Rowe's secrets. And as I merged into traffic, I realized with a strange, dark thrill that for the first time in the history of my family, Tyler wasn't the one holding all the cards. He was just the one walking blindly into the room where the deck was stacked against him. The phone rang at 11:30 at night. I was lying on the pull-out sofa in Janice's living room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The screen lit up the dark room with a single name, Tyler. I let it ring 3 times. My instinct, honed over 35 years of submission, was to pick it up immediately, to apologize for making him wait, to smooth things over, but I could feel the phantom weight of the letter in my pocket, and Dana Keir's voice in my head. Let him think you are defeated. I swiped to answer and put the phone to my ear, but I did not say hello. I just breathed. Elena? Tyler's voice came through the speaker. It was different from the cold, metallic tone he had used when he kicked me out. It was soft, concerned. It was the voice he used on clients when he was trying to explain why a project was 2 months behind schedule. I am here, I said. My voice sounded small, which was exactly what he wanted. Look, he sighed. A heavy, theatrical exhale. I have been sitting here feeling sick about how things went down the other day. The rain, the stress of the funeral we are both grieving. I think emotions got the better of us. I do not want us to be enemies. Mom and Dad would not want that. I gripped the phone tighter. He had thrown my nursing degree into the mud, and now he was invoking Mom and Dad to manipulate me. What do you want? Tyler, I asked. I want to help you, he said. He sounded magnanimous, like a king tossing a coin to a beggar. I know things are tight for you. I know an apartment deposit is expensive, and nursing well. I know the pay is not exactly great. So, I have been crunching some numbers. I heard the rustle of paper on his end. I am willing to cut you a check. Elena, right now, tonight, I can transfer it or bring you cash. $12,000. I stayed silent. $12,000. To him, it was the price of a used truck. To the old me, it would have been a fortune. That is a lot of money. He pressed, mistaking my silence for awe. It is enough to set you up for a year. Get a nice place. Maybe take a vacation. You look tired. You deserve a break. All I need you to do is sign a little waiver. Just a standard document saying you are satisfied with the settlement, and you waive any future claims to the estate. It saves us both the headache of lawyers and court fees. We keep it in the family. Simple. The audacity of it took my breath away. He wasn't just trying to buy me off. He was trying to rob me blind before I even knew what was in the vault. "And if I do not sign?" I asked. The softness in his voice fractured. Just for a second. Why wouldn't you sign? Elena, let's be realistic here. You are a nurse. You change bedpans and wipe up after old people. You are basically a glorified maid. $12,000 is more than you save in 3 years. Do not let pride make you stupid. The insult landed, but it didn't sting like it used to. It just clarified things. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a commodity he could undervalue. Suddenly, I heard a voice in the background. It was Savannah. She sounded close to the phone, her voice hissing and frantic. "Tell her the offer is only good for 48 hours. She whispered loudly. "Tyler, the bank needs the confirmation by Friday, or they will pull the—" "Hush!" Tyler snapped away from the receiver. My heart gave a strange, violent thud. The bank, Friday, Elena? Tyler was back, his voice regaining its smooth veneer. "Ignore her. She is just stressed. Look, this is a one-time offer. I am trying to look out for you. If we go to the will reading, the lawyers are going to eat up everything in fees. You could end up with nothing. I am offering you a sure thing." I sat up on the sofa. The fear was still there, trembling in my hands, but my mind was icy clear. Mom's letter. Do not sign anything. Dana's warning. He will try to buy you out. No. I said. There was a pause. A long, heavy silence where I could hear his breathing change. "What did you say?" I said no. "Tyler, I do not want the $12,000. The mask fell off completely. The kind, concerned brother vanished, replaced by the bully who used to lock me in the basement when we were kids. "Are you insane?" he shouted. The distortion on the phone line crackled. "You are going to walk away from cash? For what? You think there is a pot of gold waiting for you? Dad left everything to me. Everything. You are going to walk into that office and get embarrassed. Elena, you are going to end up with zero. We will see on Friday." I said. "Do not hang up on me," he roared. "You ungrateful, greedy little leech. I let you live in that house for 2 years, rent-free, while you played nurse. And this is how you repay me. You are going to regret this. I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure you never—" I pressed the red button. The silence rushed back into the room, ringing in my ears. I was shaking. My whole body was vibrating with the adrenaline of finally saying no to the person who had controlled my life for 3 decades. I hugged my knees to my chest, gasping for air. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text message. I flinched, thinking it was him continuing his tirade. It wasn't. It was Dana Kerr. He called, didn't he? I typed back with trembling fingers. Yes. He offered me $12,000 to sign a waiver. 3 dots appeared. Then the reply. He is afraid. Confident people do not sell fast. Stay strong. I lowered the phone and looked out the window at the empty street lamp. Savannah's whisper replayed in my mind. The bank needs the confirmation by Friday. Friday was the day of the will reading. Tyler wasn't just greedy. That was the revelation that finally stopped my shaking. If he was just greedy, he would have waited. He would have let the process play out, confident in his inheritance. But he was rushing. He was panicking. He needed me to sign away my rights before Friday. Why? Because he needed the house. And not just to live in. He needed the house as collateral. I remembered the conversation I had overheard months ago about stopping the bleeding. I remembered the letter from the debt collector I found in the trash. Tyler lived a life of shiny trucks and country clubs. But it was a facade. He was drowning, and he had been counting on Mom and Dad dying to pull him to the surface. A dark realization settled over me. He wasn't mourning them. He was likely relieved when the accident happened. He saw their death as his payday. But Mom had seen it too. She had seen the desperation behind his arrogance. I lay back down, pulling the blanket up to my chin. For the first time, I didn't feel like the victim in a tragedy. I felt like the spectator at a demolition. Tyler was a man holding a grenade with the pin pulled out. And he was terrified that on Friday, I was going to be the one to refuse to take it from his hand. Let him panic. I thought, closing my eyes. Let him sweat. I can wait. I have waited my whole life. The morning sun did not make the house look welcoming. It just made the newly installed brass locks gleam with a sharper, more aggressive brightness. I had returned only because I had to. There were still things in the garage, winter coats, a box of nursing journals, and a few of Mom's old recipe books that Tyler had not bothered to throw onto the lawn, presumably because they were not in his direct line of sight. I did not come alone. Janice drove her beat-up sedan, parking it right behind Tyler's massive truck spot. Though the truck was thankfully missing, Janice sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, ready to act as a getaway driver or a witness, depending on what the situation required. He is not here, I said, watching the driveway. The house was silent. I walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. I avoided looking at the front door. Instead, I veered toward the mailbox at the end of the drive. It was an old brick structure Dad had built himself, sturdy and stubborn. Tyler had changed the locks on the doors, but in his haste to claim the kingdom, he had forgotten the moat. He hadn't checked the mail. I pulled down the rusted metal flap. It was stuffed full. Junk mail, flyers for pizza, and sympathy cards from neighbors who didn't know the son had already evicted the daughter. I grabbed the stack, intending to sort it later, but one envelope slipped from the pile and landed in the grass. It was not a sympathy card. It was a window envelope with a red stripe across the top. Final notice. I picked it up. It was addressed to Tyler Rowe. I frowned. Tyler had not lived here in 10 years. He had a sprawling house in a new development on the other side of town. Why was his mail coming here? And why was it marked urgent? I glanced at the house, then back at Janice, who gave me a nod of encouragement. I slid my finger under the flap. I knew it was a federal offense to open someone else's mail, but after what my brother had done to my life, I figured the universe owed me a little leeway. I pulled out the letter. It was from a private lending company I had never heard of, something that sounded less like a bank and more like a place that broke kneecaps if you missed a payment. Dear Mr. Rowe, regarding your request for an expedited asset appraisal on the property located at the Rowe family residence in Richmond, please be advised that the appraiser is scheduled for... I stopped reading. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold in the warm sunlight. I looked at the date of the appointment. It was dated 2 days after the accident. 2 days. My parents' bodies had barely been cold. I had been sitting on the stairs of the hospital, catatonic with shock. And while I was weeping, Tyler had been on the phone. He had not been calling relatives. He had not been arranging flowers. He had been scheduling an appraisal. You do not appraise a house 48 hours after a death, unless you are planning to sell it immediately. You do not schedule it that fast, unless you have been waiting for the opportunity. I looked further down the page. There was a reference number for a bridge loan, a high-interest, short-term loan used by people who are desperate for cash flow. The letter was a warning that the loan approval was contingent on the deed being transferred into his name by the end of the month. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. Savannah's frantic whispering on the phone. The bank needs the confirmation by Friday. Her comment months ago at dinner. We need this. They were not just greedy heirs. They were insolvent debtors. I ran back to the car, clutching the paper like it was a smoking gun. Drive. I told Janice. Just drive. We went to a coffee shop 3 towns over, far enough away that I didn't have to worry about running into anyone who knew the Rowe name. I called Dana Kerr immediately. I found something. I said, my voice shaking. I read her the letter. I read her the dates. I heard the scratch of a pen on the other end of the line. Dana was silent for a long moment. Then she let out a long, slow exhale. This confirms it, she said. Her voice was grim. Elena, I did some digging after you told me about his cash offer. I spoke to a realtor friend of mine. Tyler approached him at the funeral reception. At the reception? I asked, horrified. Yes. While you were shaking hands and accepting condolences, your brother was asking how quickly he could list the house as a cash-only sale. He wanted to know if he could bypass the usual inspections to close faster. I felt sick. The image of Tyler standing at the podium, eulogizing Dad as a man of integrity, while mentally calculating the square footage of his inheritance, made my stomach turn. He is bro, isn't he? I asked. He is leveraged to the hilt. Dana confirmed. His company has multiple liens against it. He has been borrowing against future projects to pay for past mistakes. He needed this inheritance to clear the books. That is why he rushed the appraisal. That is why he changed the locks. He needs to show the lenders that he has physical possession of the asset. He is selling my childhood home to pay off his bad business deals. I whispered, "He is trying to." Dana corrected, "But he cannot sell what he does not own. And that is why he is terrified of you. If you contest the will, the probate process drags on for months, maybe years. His lenders will not wait that long. He needs a clean title, and he needs it this week. So the $12,000 was a bribe to get you out of the way, so he could liquidate the house before the bank comes for his own assets." I leaned back in the booth, staring at the letter. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. Tyler wasn't the powerful patriarch he pretended to be. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, and I was the one with the hand on the lever. "What do I do?" I asked. "Do I confront him? Do I show him this letter and tell him I know he is a fraud?" "No," Dana said sharply. "Absolutely not. If you confront him now, he will just deny it or find another way to force your hand. He might get dangerous. We wait. We let him think he still has a chance until we are all in that room on Friday. The will reading is where the truth gets locked in by the law. Do not give him the advantage of a warning." I hung up the phone and looked at Janice. She didn't say anything, just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That night, the eve of the will reading, I couldn't sleep. The air in the apartment felt thick, charged with the electricity of a coming storm. I kept checking my phone, half expecting Tyler to call again, to scream, to beg. At 1 a.m, a message came through. It was from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just a string of digits. I opened it. "If you do not sign the paper, he is going to do something crazy. He has no other choice. Take the money and run." I stared at the screen. The text was not threatening in the way Tyler's calls were. It sounded frantic, scared. Who sent this? Savannah? Had she finally realized that her husband's ship was sinking, and she was trying to throw me a life vest? Or was she just trying to save herself? Or maybe it was a secretary at his office who saw the ruin coming. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot and sent it to Dana. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the window pane. For years, I had thought the story of my family was a simple, sad tale of old-fashioned sexism. I thought I was the victim of a father who loved his son more, but as I looked at the ceiling, I realized the rot went much deeper. This wasn't just about gender. It wasn't just about tradition. It was about a conspiracy of silence that had been running for years. Tyler had built a life on lies, funded by debt and arrogance, and he had been counting on my compliance to pay the final bill. He thought I was the weak link. He thought I was just the sister who waited in the car. He was about to find out that the person who waits in the car sees everything. And tomorrow, I was going to get out of the car. Friday arrived with a sky that was the color of bruised slate. The storm that had drenched my belongings earlier in the week had passed, leaving behind a humid, suffocating stillness. It was the kind of atmosphere where sound traveled too far, and every car door slamming in the street sounded like a gunshot. I arrived at the offices of Kerr and Halbrook an hour early. As instructed, Dana Kerr was already there, pacing the length of her conference room like a general inspecting the battlefield before the first cannon fire. The room was imposing, dominated by a long table of dark, polished walnut that reflected the gloomy sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Sit down." "Elena," Dana said, not stopping her pace. "We need to go over the choreography." "Choreography?" I asked, placing my purse on the floor. "I thought we were just reading a document." Dana stopped and turned to me. Her expression was grave. "This is not going to be a standard reading. Usually, a lawyer sits at the head of the table, reads the distribution of assets, hands out copies, and everyone goes home. Today, we are doing things differently because your mother requested it." She walked over to a side table where a sleek, black laptop was set up, connected to a projector system that pointed at a blank white screen on the far wall. Next to the laptop sat a small, silver USB drive. It was sealed in a clear plastic evidence bag with a strip of red security tape across the cap. "We will be reading 2 separate sets of documents," Dana explained. "First, we will address your father's estate. That will be quick. It is exactly what you expect. Then, we will address your mother's estate. But before I read a single word of Elaine's will, we are going to watch a presentation." I stared at her. A presentation? Like a slideshow of photos? "No." Dana said, "A video recording. Your mother sat in this very room 6 months ago and recorded a statement. She wanted to speak directly to the family. She knew that after she was gone, people, specifically your brother, would try to twist her words. They would say she was confused, or coerced, or that she didn't understand the value of the assets. She wanted to make sure there was no room for interpretation. She wanted to look Tyler in the eye one last time. My stomach did a slow, sick somersault. The idea of seeing her face, moving and talking on that big screen, felt like a ghost story I wasn't ready to read. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Because I needed you to be ready," Dana said. "And I need you to be prepared for what happens when that screen goes dark. Tyler is going to lose his mind." She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Listen to me closely. Elena, Tyler is going to realize very quickly that he has lost control. When a narcissist loses control, they do not get sad. They get aggressive. He is going to try to provoke you. He will insult you. He will bring up your childhood. He will probably say things about your job that are designed to make you scream." "He wants a fight?" I asked. "He wants a reaction," Dana corrected. "If he can make you look unstable, emotional, or hysterical, he lays the groundwork to challenge the will later. He wants to paint a picture of an erratic daughter who manipulated a dying woman, You cannot give him that picture. You have to be a statue. Do you understand? No matter what he says, you sit there and you breathe. You let me do the talking. I nodded, though my hands were cold as ice. I can do that. Good, because you have reinforcements. The heavy oak doors opened, and for a second, I thought the meeting was starting early. But it wasn't Tyler. It was my grandmother. Ruth Sloane stood in the doorway, leaning lightly on a cane with a silver handle shaped like a hawk's head. I hadn't seen her in 3 years. Not since a Christmas dinner where she had made Frank Rowe uncomfortable by asking exactly how much debt his company was carrying. She was 82, but she looked like she was carved out of granite. She wore a black suit that was tailored within an inch of its life, and her white hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. "Grandma?" I stood up, stunned. "I didn't know you were coming." Ruth didn't smile. She walked into the room, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the hardwood floor. She stopped in front of me and looked me up and down, her eyes sharp and assessing. "I would not miss this for the world," she said. Her voice was just as I remembered it, raspy, low, and completely devoid of nonsense. She reached out and gripped my shoulder. Her hand was strong. "You look tired. Elena, you have your mother's eyes, but you have been carrying your father's burden for too long." She turned to Dana. "Is everything in place?" "Everything is ready." "Mrs. Sloane," Dana said with a nod of respect. I had rarely seen her give anyone. Ruth turned back to me. She reached into her handbag, a small, structured leather thing that probably cost more than my car, and pulled out a small velvet box. She pressed it into my hand. "Put this away," she commanded. I opened it slightly. Inside was a single, heavy iron key and a folded slip of paper. "Do not open the note until the reading is finished," Ruth said. "That key is for a safety deposit box at the bank downtown. Your mother and I set it up years ago." "My mother," I stammered, looking between Ruth and Dana. "You knew? You knew about all of this?" Ruth's expression softened. Just a fraction. It was the only crack in her armor. "Your father thought he married a flower. Elena. He thought Elaine was just something pretty to put in a vase and sit on a shelf. He forgot that flowers have roots. Your mother was not naive. She was trapped. Yes, but she was never blind. And she was a Sloane before she was a Rowe. We protect our own." She tapped my hand with her own papery fingers. "Tyler thinks he is walking in here to collect a trophy. He does not know he is walking into a slaughterhouse." I put the box in my purse, my heart hammering against my ribs. The scope of this was staggering. This wasn't just a will. It was a conspiracy of women, spanning generations, silent and subterranean, all leading to this moment. Dana cleared her throat. "There is one last thing you need to understand. Elena, it is the lock on the trap." She pulled a document from her file. "Your mother included a no-contest clause in her will. In legal terms, It is called an in terrorem clause. Latin for in vier, Ruth murmured, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Exactly, Dana said. It means that if any beneficiary challenges the validity of the will, if Tyler tries to sue, claiming your mother was incompetent or coerced, and he loses that challenge, he forfeits everything. He gets nothing, not a dime, not a picture frame. He will be terrified to sue. I realized. That is the point. Dana said, he has to choose. He can accept what your mother decided, which will be painful for him, or he can gamble everything and likely end up with zero. Given his financial situation, he cannot afford to gamble. He needs whatever scraps she left him just to keep the lights on. The intercom buzzed. Mr. and Mrs. Rowe are here. The receptionist's voice crackled. Dana looked at me. It is time. Remember, you are a statue. I took a deep breath. I thought of Janice, who had hugged me goodbye at the door of her apartment 20 minutes ago. She had straightened my collar and looked me in the eye. People reveal themselves when they think they have won. Janice had said, let him think he has won, right up until the second he hasn't. I sat down in the chair to Dana's right. I folded my hands on the table. I fixed my eyes on the blank white screen. The door handle turned. I looked at the silver USB drive sitting on the table. It looked so small, so innocuous. Just a little stick of metal and plastic. But as the door swung open, and I heard the heavy tread of my brother's boots crossing the threshold, I knew better. It wasn't a computer accessory. It was a bomb, and the timer had just hit 0. The heavy oak door swung open, and my brother walked in as if he were stepping onto a stage where the audience had already been paid to applaud him. Tyler was wearing a navy suit that was tailored to hide the slight paunch of stress he had developed over the last few years, and his hair was gelled back with aggressive precision. He looked like every successful contractor in a magazine spread, confident, substantial, and utterly in charge. Savannah followed him, the clicking of her heels against the hardwood floor echoing like frantic Morse code. She was dressed in a cream-colored dress that was far too festive for a legal proceeding, and her phone was already in her hand. Her thumbs were flying across the screen, likely updating her status to let the world know she was about to become the official queen of the Rowe legacy. Tyler was halfway to the chair opposite me before he noticed the fourth person at the table. He stopped mid-stride. The confident smile faltered, just for a second, before he plastered it back on. "Grandma Ruth," he said, his voice pitching slightly higher than usual. "I did not know you were coming up from Williamsburg. You should have told me. I would have sent a car." Ruth did not smile. She did not blink. She sat at the end of the table with her hands folded over the silver head of her cane, looking at him with the cold, predatory patience of a hawk watching a field mouse. I made my own way. "Tyler," she said. Her voice was dry as autumn leaves. "Sit down." Tyler cleared his throat. Clearly unsettled. He pulled out a chair for Savannah, who gave a little wave to everyone without looking up from her screen, and then sat down himself. He glanced at the silver USB drive in the evidence bag on the table, frowned slightly, but dismissed it. He turned his attention to Dana Kerr. "Let us get this over with." "Dana," he said, checking his watch, "I have a site visit at 2:00. Standard reading, right? Dad leaves the business to me. Mom leaves the china to Elena. We sign the papers. And we all go home." Dana looked at him over the rim of her glasses. She did not pick up a pen. She did not open a file. She just waited until the silence in the room became uncomfortable enough to suffocate conversation. "We will proceed in the order of death," Dana said formally. "We will begin with the last will and testament of Frank Rowe." She opened the first folder. Tyler leaned back, draping his arm over the back of Savannah's chair. He looked at me and winked. It was a gesture of camaraderie that felt more like a slap. It said, "Look at us, playing grown-ups." Dana began to read. The legal language was dense, full of words like hereby and bequeath, but the meaning was simple enough to cut bone. My father had left the construction firm, the entirety of his stock portfolio, the trucks, the equipment, and the rights to all current contracts to his son, Tyler Rowe. It was a transfer of empire. It was an affirmation that in Frank Rowe's world, only men built things, and only men deserved to keep them. To his daughter, Elena James. Dana read, her voice remaining perfectly neutral. He leaves the sum of $20,000, intended as a gesture of goodwill. $20,000. It was less than the cost of the new deck Tyler had just put on his house. It was not an inheritance. It was a tip. Tyler let out a long, loud exhale of relief. The tension that had been holding his shoulders up seemed to dissolve. He looked at Savannah, who squeezed his arm and finally put her phone down, beaming. They had done it. They had secured the assets they needed to leverage against the loans. The bleeding had stopped. He turned to me, his face arranging itself into a mask of benevolent pity. $20,000 is decent. "Elle," he said, "it is a nice cushion. You can pay off some student loans, or maybe get a better car." I said nothing. I kept my hands folded on the table, digging my fingernails into my palms to keep from shaking. "Do not look so sour," Tyler continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "Dad knew the business needs capital to run. It is not personal. I will make sure the check is cut by next week. You should be grateful he thought of you at all." Savannah chimed in, her voice sugary. "We should all go to dinner tonight. To celebrate, I mean. To honor them. My treat? Well, Tyler's treat." She picked up her phone again, likely drafting the caption for the photo she would take of the champagne bottle. "God is so good." New chapter. "Well," Tyler said, slapping his hands on the table and making to stand up. "If that is all, sit down. Mr. Rowe." Dana said. The command was not loud, but it had the weight of an anvil. Tyler froze halfway out of his chair. "Excuse me?" he asked. "We are not finished," Dana said. She closed the folder on Frank Rowe's will and moved it to the side. She reached for the second, thicker file. "We have only addressed your father's estate. We must now address the estate of Elaine Rowe." Tyler laughed. It was a short, incredulous bark of a sound. "Mom?" he asked. "Dana, come on. Mom did not have an estate. She had joint accounts with Dad, which are now mine. She had some jewelry, and maybe some clothes. Just give Elena the jewelry and let us go. I really do have to get to that site." Dana did not look at him. She reached out and picked up the plastic bag containing the silver USB drive. She held it up, letting the fluorescent light catch the red security tape. Your mother had significantly more than jewelry. "Mr. Rowe," Dana said quietly. Tyler frowned, his eyes tracking the USB drive. "What is that?" "Before we read the distribution of assets," Dana said, ignoring his question. "Your mother left very specific instructions. She required that before any document is read or any signature is collected, we must view a video statement she recorded in this office 6 months ago. She also required that I read a supplementary statement regarding the status of the family home." Tyler scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes now. A video? Why would she make a video? She was not herself at the end. She was on a lot of medication. If this is some rambly, sentimental goodbye, she was perfectly lucid. Dana interrupted, her voice sharpening. And she was not rambling. Savannah stopped typing. She looked at the USB drive, then at Tyler. Her smile had faded. "I do not have time for this," Tyler snapped, though he did not move to leave. "Just read the paper." Dana, what did she leave? The garden gnomes? The old sedan? Donna placed the USB drive into the port of the laptop connected to the projector. A blue light flickered on the side of the machine. The white screen on the wall hummed to life, glowing with a bright, empty anticipation. She left clarity, Dana said. She typed a password into the laptop. The room went silent, save for the hum of the projector fan. "But before I press play," Dana said, looking up and locking eyes with Tyler, "there is one other matter we must address. It is a legal housekeeping issue, but it directly affects the liquidity of the estate you just inherited from your father." Tyler narrowed his eyes. "What housekeeping issue?" Dana pulled a single sheet of paper from the file. It looked like a formal legal filing, stamped with the seal of the county clerk. "It concerns a fraud investigation," Dana said, her words dropping into the room like stones into a deep well. Tyler's face went the color of ash. "What?" he whispered. Dana adjusted her glasses. 3 days before she passed, your mother filed a formal request with the district attorney's office and the county registrar to investigate a potential case of deed fraud and identity theft regarding the family property. She provided evidence that someone had attempted to use the home as collateral for a high-risk bridge loan without the legal owner's consent. The room seemed to tilt. I saw Savannah's hand fly to her mouth. I saw Ruth tighten her grip on her cane. And, Dana continued, her voice devoid of any pity. She named the primary suspect in that investigation. She looked straight at Tyler. "Shall we watch the video now, Mr. Rowe? Or would you like a moment to call your own lawyer?" The projector screen hummed to life, cutting through the heavy silence of the conference room. My mother's face appeared, filling the white space. She looked younger in the video, her hair freshly styled, sitting in the very chair I was occupying now. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes clear and sharp, devoid of the pain that had clouded them in her final months. "Hello, Tyler. Hello, Elena," the video version of my mother said. Her voice was steady. "If you are watching this, I am gone. And if you are watching this, it means Tyler has tried to take the house." Tyler shifted in his chair. His jaw clenched tight. "Frank always taught you that the world belongs to men who take what they want," Mom continued. "He taught you that your sister was a guest in her own home, but for the last 2 years, Tyler, you were the guest. You visited. You checked your watch. You left. Elena stayed. She washed me. She fed me. She was the daughter you were too busy to be." "This is ridiculous," Tyler muttered, making to stand up. "She was clearly influenced by—" "Sit down," Dana Kerr said. It wasn't a request. On the screen, Mom leaned forward. "You think the house is yours because Frank built it, but you forgot something. Tyler, do you remember 5 years ago, when Dad was being sued by that subcontractor for the structural collapse in Newport? He was terrified of losing everything. So, to protect the assets, he transferred the deed of the family home entirely into my name." Tyler froze. "He meant to transfer it back," Mom said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "But he forgot, and I never reminded him. The house at 42 Oak Creek Drive is not marital property. It is my sole, separate property, and I can leave it to whomever I choose." The screen went black. Dana opened the second file. "I have the deed here," she said, sliding a document across the polished table. "It is notarized and filed. The house belongs to the estate of Elaine Rowe, and in her will, she leaves the property, in its entirety, to her daughter, Elena James." "No!" Tyler slammed his fist on the table. "That is a lie. Dad built that house. It is part of the business assets. I will sue you. I will sue all of you for undue influence." "You could, try," Dana said calmly. "But before you call your lawyer, you should hear the rest." She pulled out another document. "Your mother also established an irrevocable trust 3 years ago. It is funded by the inheritance she received from her own father, money that never touched Frank Rowe's accounts. The sole beneficiary of this trust, which contains a sum of $350,000, is Elena James." I gasped. I looked at Grandma Ruth. She gave me a barely perceptible nod. "Furthermore," Dana continued, relentless, "Elaine took out a private life insurance policy with Sentinel Life Assurance 5 years ago, The payout is $500,000. The sole beneficiary is Elena James." Savannah made a sound like a wounded animal. She looked at Tyler, her eyes wide with panic. "Tyler, did you hear that? 800,000? And the house?" Tyler was breathing hard, his face a mottled red. "You cannot do this. I have loans. I have leveraging agreements based on that equity." "Ah," Dana said. "The loans." She picked up the file she had teased earlier, the fraud investigation. "This is where it gets complicated for you. Tyler," Dana said. She opened the folder and spread 3 photos on the table. The first was the letter I had found in the mailbox. The appraisal appointment made 48 hours after the accident. The second was a zoomed-in image of a signature on a loan application. "This is an application for a bridge loan, dated the day of the funeral," Dana said. "It is signed by Elaine Rowe. But your mother was deceased when this was signed. That is forgery. Tyler, that is a felony." The third photo was a still frame from a video. It showed a man in a raincoat drilling out the lock of a front door. "Your mother had a Ring camera installed inside the porch light 6 months ago," Dana said. "She knew you would try to change the locks before you had the legal right. We have footage of you breaking into a property that did not belong to you to illegally evict a lawful resident." The silence in the room was absolute. Tyler looked at the photos, sweat beading on his forehead. He wasn't looking at a lost inheritance anymore. He was looking at prison time. "The district attorney is very interested in this file," Dana said, tapping the forgery. "Elaine authorized me to submit it if you contested the will, but she gave me discretion to hold it back if you accepted the terms quietly." "We are ruined," Savannah whispered. It wasn't a theatric whisper this time. It was real. "The bank is going to call the note on the business." "Tyler, we put the house up as collateral. If you do not get this house, they take everything." "Shut up, Savannah," Tyler hissed. "No, let her speak," I said. It was the first time I had spoken since the video ended. My voice was calm, steady, and loud. "Let her say it. You are broke. Aren't you, Tyler? You wanted the house to fix your mistakes." Tyler looked at me, hate burning in his eyes. "You selfish witch. You are going to let the family business die? Dad's legacy? Over a house?" "Dad's legacy was a lie," I said. "And Mom's legacy is the truth." Dana closed the file. "There is a no contest clause in Elaine's will," she said. "If you challenge this, Tyler, if you file a single motion to delay probate, you forfeit the personal effects and the small cash stipend your father left you. You will walk away with absolutely nothing. Or you can sign the waiver. Accept that the house and the money are gone, and we will not file the fraud charges today." Tyler slumped in his chair. He looked small. The giant who had cast a shadow over my life for 35 years had shrunk down to the size of a frightened, greedy boy. He looked at Savannah, but she had turned away from him, already weeping into her hands. He picked up the pen. His hand shook as he signed the waiver. He didn't look at me. He stood up, stripped of his arrogance, stripped of his victory, and walked out of the room without a word. Savannah followed, sobbing about bankruptcy and humiliation. The door clicked shut. I sat there, the sound of my own heartbeat filling my ears. I looked at Grandma Ruth. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "It is done," she said. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, and a shaft of pale, clean sunlight was hitting the pavement below. I turned back to Dana. "Thank you," I said. "Do not thank me," Dana replied, handing me a set of keys, the old brass keys to the house. "Thank your mother. She played the hardest game of her life to make sure you won." I drove back to the house alone. When I pulled into the driveway, it looked different. It wasn't the fortress that had locked me out. It wasn't the monument to Frank Rowe's ego. It was just a house that needed painting, a house that needed love. I walked up the steps and inserted the key. It turned smoothly. I stepped inside. The air was stale, but it was mine. I walked through the living room, past the spot where Tyler had stood, and told me to get out. I walked into the kitchen, where I had spent years scrubbing floors. I didn't stop there. I went out the back door, into the garden. The storm had beaten down the hydrangeas, but the roots were strong. The soil was wet and rich. I knelt down in the dirt, ruining my good slacks, and dug my hands into the earth. I thought of my mother. I thought of the seeds she had saved. I wasn't going to just live here. I was going to change everything. I would paint the walls. I would plant a new garden. I would use the money to go back to school, to become a doctor, to do whatever I wanted. Tyler had wanted to sell the past, to pay for his failures. I was going to keep the past, heal it, and use it to grow a future. I took the envelope with the seeds out of my pocket and scattered them into the earth. "I am home, Mom," I whispered, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Elena's victory. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to see justice served.